founders specifically talk about branding, and my vision of branding is it is the heartbeat, it is the lifeblood. From the time that you name the company, every single thing comes from brand.
When we're designing brand identity systems and logos, one of the things that we filter our designs through is, can I look at this logo for a few seconds and then sketch it out on a napkin? That sketch idea needs to also apply to your name. Can I remember it after hearing it just a couple of times? Is it simple? Is it relevant? Under Armour, Iron Man, these names apply.
A lot of times I hear founders think about brand from the perspective of it's a logo, it's a color Pantone, that's their level of branding. That's a transformation that founders need to understand before they start their brand, is that it's not about me. All right, let's go, Jordan. So good to hang out with you today.
Yeah.
Looking forward to talking about all things branding and how we get started coming up with a brand name and some of the emotions and feelings that we get when we think about starting a company wrapped around an identity. So I want to hear your thoughts, maybe like how would you come up with a brand? Let's start with Loom.
Okay.
How did you come up with Loom, or how did you and the team come up with the Loom name?
Yeah, I mean, naming is one of the hardest things that a young business does, because you want to come up with something that makes sense for your offering, for your product, for your service, but also something that resonates with your audience, right? So for us with Loom, we started with, what do we do? And a big component of the branding and strategy and coaching that we provide our clients is about taking all of those loose ends and those threads that are swirling around the mind of a founder or a entrepreneur and weaving them to create something beautiful, tangible, tactical. And so, that originated from a conversation that I had with a dear friend who highlighted to me that was one of my superpowers of weaving things together and helping people understand the big picture. And I didn't know that about myself, really. And so that was like a great nugget. And we realized that using the name Loom was such a great way to signal that to our client base. They need those loose ends tied. They need tangible deliverables. And so, that was kind of the origin of that thing.
I love how you said your friend kind of helped you identify that little magical nugget, that piece of power that you may not have known about yourself. And it's so important that we go out to our perceived customers or our friends and family or anybody that we can have access to have those dialogues and those conversations about where is that magical power that lies within us.
Yeah.
And it's like doing customer discovery, right? And I think that's a good way to think about how you start to come up with a name. Like, what are the key values that other people see in you, and how do we start to identify a name that goes with that?
Well, yeah. And I think it's that, as you said, doing the market research in essence. Mm-hmm. And so even before it was kind of like official, it was really important for me to try out the name and explain it and see the reaction that occurred.
Yeah, for sure. Over your career, doing design and starting brands, and what are some of the brands that you have been part of, helped name from the very beginning, and how? Let's talk about why and how you came up with those brands. So maybe just a couple of your favorite brands.
Yeah. So one of the clients that we have that has a fantastic name is Good Dye Young, and they're a hair dye and hair care company. And their business has a really fun brand identity and playful and creative identity. And so that name, that pun, because it's good, D-Y-E, young, really fit their identity and fit their posture in the market. There were some other hair dye companies that were playful at the time of their, birthing, but there weren't that many. Mm-hmm. And so that playful tone, that pun was something that was really unique to Good Die Young. And, that translated across the board from the colors that they were selling. All of them had fun, titles and names. So I think whenever you come up with a name, it has to ring true to the product that you're selling, to the offering that you have.
Yeah. When you talk about ringing true, we think about like, how do we tell a quick story in the name? Like, think of a story being 10, 15, 20 minutes long, a feeling that may bring out excitement or certain emotions. And how do we use a word or a combination of words to pull that out within the first second, like the first time you see it? And I think some of the best brands that I see really have this ethos around them, and their customers really lock in with those value points. They have nailed the name first.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, Under Armour.
Yep.
The name makes sense for the product, especially the initial product they provided, Airbnb. The name makes sense. It clues you in to what they're giving you.
So Jordan, when you think about some of the brands that you purchase from, that you have identity in, let's talk about like, what's a brand that you really love and are passionate about?
Yeah, there's a company called Peak Design, and they make bags, backpacks, over the shoulder bags, and pouches.
Okay.
And they started on Kickstarter, and their whole angle was, let's go after the photographer that's traveling the world.
Okay.
Because these bags that are currently on the market are lame. They're not functioning as a photographer would want. And so they came across my proverbial desk, and I was like, wow, this name, Peak Design, right? They're talking about adventure. They're talking about high performance. So the name Peak really works. And their bags are so elegant, but also tactically helpful that the name resonates. And I own a few of their bags. They hold up great. They are the peak, in my view, of this kind of bag.
Yep. And you mentioned that they kind of tailor their message and their brand toward photographers, right? There's a lot of times when you're starting out your brand, there's this opportunity where I want to be everything to everyone, and I think it's more important that we become really good for a specific someone. And in their case, specifically for traveling photographers, it sounds like, right?
Yes.
So, and being able to be laser focused on traveling photographers, I think that's where they find their magical power. I love, being able to start there. And you may have brought up Under Armour previously. It's they started for that athlete that needed that internal, that underneath layer for their performance, right? And they weren't trying to be that external layer at the beginning, right? Now they're an external brand that you would wear, but first they were that internal layer. So it's never too early to go too niche.
Create the thing that you need.
Yeah.
Create the thing that you want. And you're so right. Niching down is the key to establishing that foundation of customer base. Because now, I'll go into a creative conference or a co-working space, and there are non-photographers that have these Peak bags because it's just an excellent bag, but it grew from that passionate, evangelical base in the sense of they were evangelizing the benefits of this bag, and it spread beyond the photographer base.
Yeah, very, very cool. One of the favorite brands that I'm really passionate about is the brand of Ironman. And I think about it from yes, I'm a triathlete and spend a lot of time training and a lot of money on gear so that I can go do these Ironman races. And there's other brands of triathlons out there, right? But the Ironman brand is the pinnacle. It was originated in Hawaii for a small group of people, endurance athletes that were runners and swimmers and bicyclists, and they combined that event together. And it started in Kona, Hawaii. And I think when I think about starting a brand from scratch, it's that small niche. And back in I think it's the 70s when Ironman actually was created, it was a very small group of people. and they knew how to get access to those people because they were those people, right? When you bring up the peak performance of the Peak bag brand, they're likely, I guarantee you, they're probably traveling photographers, right? And they know the ins and outs of what traveling photographers need. And as we're starting a brand, like we want to find that identity within ourselves so that we can talk about it to other people. And then that's how we start to grow from there.
100%.
So if I'm the first time founder and I'm going to be starting a brand, what are some tactical things that I can do to begin to pick or come up with a name?
Yeah, that's a great question. So number one, it's got to be memorable. When we're designing brand identity systems and logos, one of the things that we filter our designs through is, can I look at this logo for a few seconds and then sketch it out on a napkin? That sketch idea needs to also apply to your name. Can I remember it after hearing it just a couple of times? Is it simple, right? That recall aids, or the simplicity aids in the recall. Is it relevant? Peak design, right? We're talking about high performance. We're talking about travel, going to these different peaks, even mountaintops, if you will. Under Armour, Iron Man, these names apply. Is it unique? Like, can I trademark it? Are there social handles available? All of these logistical things are important, but also, is it timeless, right? We don't want to be using slang in a way that dates our brand name. And so I think memorable, simple, timeless, available, those things are key linchpins.
Yep. I have a friend of mine, he's got a company and his customers are literally tattooing their logo on their bodies. And that made a massive statement to me that they have created a product that their customers love so much that they're willing to make that their identity. So I talked about Ironman earlier. We go to an Ironman race, or you'll see people out in the summer with shorts on. They'll have the Ironman logo tattooed on their body because it's a self-identity. People see themselves in the better versions of themselves and a transformation through that brand that they're willing to tattoo that on their body. That's a big step.
It's a commitment.
That's a big commitment. And I'm not necessarily saying that everybody has to create a brand that their customers are willing to tattoo on their bodies, but I want you to think about it from that perspective of what would make my customers so excited to go to that level, to be able to portray that they are part of my club or part of my brand identity. Yeah.
Ideally, most brands benefit from building a community. Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, I'm just a HVAC repair company. Well, you want people to love your service and tell their friends about your service. Sure. So creating a community around that, creating a sense of ownership. When you talk about tattooing a logo on a body, all that is just like, I identify with this. I have ownership in this.
Yeah. When we think of, a lot of times I talk to founders and we specifically talk about branding, and my vision of branding is it is the heartbeat. It is the lifeblood from the very beginning, from the time that you name the company to everything that waterfalls down from that, from customer access support to your business model, your delivery, your packaging, every single thing that comes from brand, right? Yeah. So a lot of times I hear founders think about brand from the perspective of it's a logo or it's a color Pantone type of a feelings that they get from the colors, and that's their level of branding. So I want to talk about. Let's put everything under the brand umbrella.
Yeah.
And why is it so important that founders need to think about brand first?
If you don't think about your brand, both your messaging and your visual presentation, there is a lack of cohesion. your potential customers don't know how to identify you or place you in their life. And that is really the ultimate goal of great branding. You might be a startup founder or an innovator of some sort, and you offer me a product. If I don't know how that product fits in my life, then that offer is dead on arrival, isn't it? And so great branding conveys to a busy public who you are and why you're worth their time.
Yeah. It takes a busy public down to the simplistic level.
That's right.
Of being able to simplistically associate the value that your brand brings to them to simplify their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good.
Absolutely. And I think if like the strategy work of branding is so vital. A logo means nothing without the meaning behind it.
For sure.
And so if your brand has not taken the time, if your company has not taken the time to discern what is distinct and desirable about who you are, about what you offer, then the fanciest branding in the world is just going to fall flat. And so it's got to have that foundational stuff underneath, that power, that spark underneath. Otherwise, it's just white noise.
Yeah. When we talk about brand foundation, so when usually partners or businesses that are starting to create their brand identity or their company name, usually it's a couple of people, a couple of co-founders. I encourage people to kind of go through what are the words that I want people to say about my brand, a big time vision in 10 years, 5 years, 20 years from now. What are the emotions that people are going to have by using my product or service? And that is usually a starting place that we can start to build our brand identity. Okay?
Absolutely.
Yep. And I can remember when we were starting Haven Lock, there was a lot of other digital lock companies out there like Lockatron and August and Schlage and Assa Abloy and all these other brands. And we were like, how do we become different? Like we're based in the floor. We're not in the door. And it was never about the lock. It was more about this sense of safety and sense of simplicity that it was built in the floor and designed for building in the floor. So that's where we came up with the name Haven, because it was encompassing the home and it wasn't about the lock itself, right? And sometimes you got to kind of come up a different layer. A lot of founders are so into the weeds of what they're building that they call their lock Lockatron, right? But really the value that you get from locking your house is safety, is peace of mind, is comfort, is simplicity. It's easy to use, right? It's these emotions that people have by using your product.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something that was huge. And I want to say to all of the founders and innovators out there, you are great at creating your widget. You are great at creating your product or your piece of tech or your service. That is amazing. In our conversations with founders, brand leaders, they get a little nervous about not being, quote unquote, as good as they should with branding. That's okay. They have a sweet spot. They have a superpower, and that is that piece of tech, that offering, that service. That's where you need to bring in brand strategists and storytellers to help you finesse that message. There's no shame in not being excellent at everything.
Yep.
And I think building a team around you to help to finesse your pitch, to finesse your brand story, to translate that into a visual world is one of the most important and powerful things that a new company or a rebranding company can do.
For sure. What are some lessons learned in your experiences working with brands where they've got it wrong? And I know I don't want to put any brand specifically on the mark here, but we see it a lot of times where brands don't get it right? And ultimately, what's the detriment to that? What's the outcome from that?
Yeah. When you don't get it right, no one cares about you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a big enough customer base to sustain your business. You don't have customers that turn into fans. Those fans are the people that are sharing about your business to their friends, their family, their coworkers. And that puts a cap on your success. You can't achieve what you're wanting to achieve because the story that you're telling is not resonating. And one of the ways that brands do this, one of the ways that you can miss the mark with branding is to not understand who you are, not understand that distinction and desirability of your brand. Another reason is, or another way that people can miss the mark in branding is putting too much emphasis on a logo to carry the weight of the company. It's not about the logo. Now, does a good logo matter? Yes, absolutely, 100%. But what is that overall world? The Nike swoosh doesn't mean anything in and of itself. But when you see that emblem, you envision the entire world that the Nike team has created, from the marketing to the branding to your experience with the physical product. And so I think it is a marriage of building an entire world and also understanding what that world is based off of, those key markers.
Yeah, for sure. So Jordan, when we're thinking about a brand, we want to be really consistent with these values that we put out and all of our messaging, from the copy on the website to how we respond and interact with customers, to copy and images in our emails, anything that's public facing to the customer. So let's talk about some common mistakes that founders make and what can they do to avoid them?
Yeah, that's huge. So you talked about those interactions with the customer. We often call those touch points. Every touch point needs to reinforce that brand story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah.
If there is a moment in the checkout process that doesn't align with the story that you're trying to tell,
could be friction.
Could be friction.
And you're about simplicity.
Exactly.
Yep.
If there is a marketing campaign that doesn't align with your brand values, that's a miss, because everyone is so busy that any sort of cognitive dissonance is a big derailment on you selling the thing that you want to sell. And so consistency comes back to understanding those core values, how you're distinct, how you're desirable, what transformation you're offering. And each touch point should reinforce those things.
Let's go deeper on that transformation thing. I think that's an important unlock for founders to understand, is what is the transformation that your product provides to go from lost to found, from starving to fed, to sad to happy, to right?
Yes.
Empowered to powered. Right. Let's go into how does a brand find that transformation?
Absolutely.
I think that's the magic.
That is the magic. And oftentimes the founders that we interact with and the businesses that we interact with, they come to us and their messaging is a little bit all over the place. And they're leaning into the features of the piece of tech or the service that they're offering.
Yep.
And, a great example of this is when Apple launched the iPod, and Steve Jobs, in his pitch to the world, it wasn't, oh, look at all the megabytes that are here, and look at this screen, and the click wheel is so nice, and this is how we made it. No. It was 1,000 songs in your pocket. That is a life change. That is a transformation.
Yep.
Right? And then, of course, he said, not only is it 1,000 songs in your pocket, because there are other MP3 players out there, but it is designed impeccably. It feels nice. He goes into those feelings. Mm-hmm. And so I think brands have to do the work to simplify the message. You can talk about the tech specs later.
Yep.
But honing into those key things, you talked about hungry and then fed, lost and then found. It sounds so basic, but honestly, that's what drives the consumer to purchase.
Yep.
That's it. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like if I am hungry, I need that food.
Right.
And then once you get past that, okay, what are the other things? I'm lost. I need to be found. I'm unloved. Maybe this new Porsche is going to help me be loved, right? Yeah. Like these are these things that big brands, and when I say big, I mean brands that move units, brands that sell, these are the things they do.
Exactly. I think it's when you're starting a brand to identify what is that transformation. A good example I like to use is I wear this Garmin watch, right? And it's got GPS on it. It's got an altimeter on it. It's got all kinds of these features and technologies that connect to certain apps, and I can track all my runs and swims and bike rides and all the vertical gain and the vertical descent. That's not why I buy it. I buy it because it helps me be a better version of myself.
Yep.
It helps me look at my performance and go, how do I get better? It's the better version of myself that I'm buying in this.
That's correct.
Right? It's crossing the finish line at a race that I didn't think I was going to be able to do. It's not the GPS, right? It's not the long battery life that I bought. I bought crossing the line at a finish race and that feeling of crossing the finish line at a race.
Yes.
Right? And as we start our brands, I want everybody to think about what is that transformation that you get at the end.
Yes.
Right. Or using your product or service.
Well, and we're so close to our product or service. We see all those details and those benefits and those tech specs. And we think those are so important. And yes, they are. But not to the consumer, not to the average consumer. And so when we lean into the spider web of features and benefits and tech specs, and also, you can cross the finish line faster, that idealized version of yourself that you're wanting to become gets lost in the noise and the message is overcomplicated. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Sure. No one cares about all the tech specs until they understand what that does for them.
For sure.
How does it change my life?
So Jordan, for companies, for tech companies specifically, I think they get wrapped around the axle going too deep on their tech specs and leading with tech specs first. So let's talk about how, or a brand or a product that you like that's heavy tech and the outcome that product brings you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great thing because there are so many products that they are selling those tech specs. So one brand that I love is Sony cameras. They are absolutely killing the game right now in their mirrorless camera offering. And so I bought one last year. The tech specs matter. Mm-hmm. There are dollars that are tied to those features.
Yep.
Absolutely. And you got to convey them. But the interesting thing is I get lured into that product and I approach that product because of the results that I see. They show beautiful photos first. And they say, okay, you could be a photographer that captures this.
Yeah.
And I think that is still leading with the personal change. It's leading with, okay, how does this affect my business if I can take better photos? How does this affect my vacations if I can capture those moments in a better way? And so immediately the tech specs come right after. Yeah. Absolutely. You got to lead those or you got to follow with those because I care about it. But the first thing is that transformation. And so I would challenge every tech company, no matter what it is, you lead with that transformation. One more example along this, Clay, is there's a company called Reticulate Micro that has just started coming onto the market. And not to bore you with details, but they have this incredible image compression process that is technically a marvel. But when they are pitching this thing, they convey to hospitals, hey, all that imagery that you have of body parts and scans and all of this stuff, we can compress that so that your storage is so much smaller, so that you can send things around the world. So doctors who are in countries that don't have good internet or Wi-Fi can send that digital imagery to an expert in another country and get feedback very quickly. They're pitching this, Reticulate Micro is pitching this compression to military, right? They're out in the middle of nowhere and like, okay, we have a photo of this thing. We need to get it analyzed. And so their message is all about the transformation for these scientists and doctors and military. It's not about the technical.
Technology.
Exactly.
Yep. Very good. Very good.